Welcome to the show. And a big welcome to you, Dr. Susan Strauss.
Thank you, Ali. I appreciate it. I'm glad to be here.
It is so good to be back with you.
Thank you kindly.
And we've got another exciting show, but more importantly, we've got some very important work to talk about. And I want to get started and introduce our guests.
Sounds like a plan.
Okay. Welcome back to you, Dr. Ellen Kennedy.
Thank you. It's always a real pleasure to be here.
We're glad you're here. And you are the Director of World Without Genocide at William Mitchell College of Law.
Correct.
Okay. And also I'd like to introduce Sarah Gibson. Hello, Sarah.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. You are an attorney at law. You are an alumna of also William Mitchell College of Law.
Correct.
And being a recent graduate, we want to say congratulations
Yeah,
to
for
you.
sure.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, today we are going to talk about the mission and the work of the International Criminal Court, and there's some direct connections to Minnesota that we'll be highlighting as well.
Great.
All right.
So I think one of the first questions that comes up is, where is the International Criminal Court anyway?
Question.
That's a great question. As you can see in the slide behind us, the International Criminal Court is located in the city of The Hague in the Netherlands. And it's there because there are many other international courts there as well. That city for probably more than 100 years has been known as the seat of international justice. And you see a picture of the court building as well. In this picture, you see on the left the person who was the first chief prosecutor of that court. That court came into being in 2002, and Luis Moreno Ocampo from Argentina led the court for a number of years. And he got started in this important work because there had been terrible crises in Argentina from 1976 to 1983, terrible state-sponsored violence. He began his legal career prosecuting the people who were the perpetrators. Just this past summer, when his term expired, the woman on the right, Fatou Bensouda of Senegal, became the new chief prosecutor. And I have this picture of the two of them together because I think it's just wonderful to see represented a white man from South America and a black woman from Africa advancing the most important human rights issues on the planet.
Can you give us an idea of what type of crimes you're talking about?
Certainly, the court has been empowered to try 4 types of crimes. Those are the crime of genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and crimes of aggression. And within each subset are several different categories. So within genocide or war crimes, you also have the subset of rape or violence or sexual slavery and issues like that. So there are subdivisions within each of those 4 broad categories, but those 4 broad categories are generally how people describe what charges have been brought against a particular individual.
Okay.
This court actually got its start as a concept way back in 1946. And the picture that the viewers are seeing is of the Nuremberg Trials that happened in Nuremberg, Germany after World War II. These were trials that were held by the 4 Allied nations to prosecute the worst of the Nazi perpetrators for killing 6 million Jews and 5 million other people. And there's a wonderful story that links what happened in that Nuremberg courtroom to the International Criminal Court. This man is the link. This man at age 27 in the background and at age 92 in the foreground. In the background, at age 27, Ben Ferencz prosecuted Nazis who were responsible for killing more than 1 million people, 22 men. He got guilty verdicts for every one of them, and it was the first case of his life.
Wow.
And this was so critical to him as a Jew who had fled from Europe before the Nazis came to power, that he then dedicated the rest of his life to advocating for the International Criminal Court, which did not begin functioning until 2002. I was fortunate to meet him, and I just have to share this picture. This was this past spring in Florida. He's 94 years old now. And Ben was present at the first completed trial held by the International Criminal Court, prosecuting this man, Thomas Lubanga. This is Ben Ferencz, dressed in the garb of the courtroom. he gave the closing argument for the court, for the prosecution. And this was remarkable because in his closing testimony, he referred back to his role at Nuremberg in 1946 and the arc of justice, how his life has truly paralleled that arc. We have a really interesting Minnesota connection as well. You see here a young woman, Heather Schumer. Heather is from Bloomington, Minnesota. Heather worked with me at World Without Genocide until she became employed at the U.S. Embassy in Kigali in Rwanda. And on March 18th, I had an email from Heather saying, Ellen, you would not believe what's happening at the embassy today. And I think Sarah can fill in what happened.
All right.
The truly most remarkable thing about this court has actually been the number of people that have voluntarily turned themselves in to the ICC for prosecution. This was one such case. And the impact and legitimacy that then displays to the rest of the world is that people who are subject to prosecution, to trial, to imprisonment, are voluntarily turning themselves over. I mean, you don't even really see that in day-to-day life in the United States, let alone for someone who's being charged with crimes against humanity or war crimes or the crime of genocide. And I think that just indicates that despite only starting in 2002, the court has gained a broad support around the world, and to the point where even individual perpetrators are subjecting themselves voluntarily to prosecution.
So, Sarah, but how? I think it's amazing that someone would turn themselves in, but why?
That was my question. What's the
Right,
catalyst?
What is making? Yeah, tell us about that.
I think the popular support around the need for a body that can prosecute these crimes of international importance, the most grave crimes, as the statute that it created the court has defined it, and the support within the communities themselves, that they are no longer finding places of refuge. They're not able to hide from prosecution any longer. And rather than hide or avoid it, they would rather confront it. And in certain cases, individuals have actually gone through the process and have been released. So
Really?
it isn't just a kangaroo court that they've set up. They've actually had legitimate trials, the evidence has been presented, defenses have been put on, and individuals have been found innocent, have been released from custody, and have gone back to their day-to-day lives. So they understand that this isn't a court that's just going to arbitrarily prosecute them and continue a cycle of illegitimate forms of justice.
Who comprises the court? Are these legal professionals from different countries?
Yes.
And do they
Yes.
volunteer for this? Or
Yes.
how does that all come about?
Yes. There are 126 member nations of this court. The United States, although supportive in many ways, is not yet on board with this, and I'll say more about that soon. But people volunteer, and then they are appropriately vetted, of course, and work their way up in the different opportunities that are available in the court. Just like any other court, there are a number of different offices and divisions of it: administration, defense, prosecution, and so on.
Okay.
So people are represented from around the world in the operating of this court.
Okay. And do they use a jury?
No.
No. So any of the cases are heard before, is it one judge or there are several?
There are several judges at every stage, a minimum of three.
Three.
And at the final trial stage, there's a larger body that sits in judgment of the case. And so it's a different style of justice than what we're used to here in the United States with the jurors that are brought on. But the individuals are entitled to a judge from their own country when the case is going forward, so that there's at least one sympathetic ear who has some greater context to the situation than what other judges from around the world might have.
Okay.
Now, although the United States is not one of those 126 signatory nations, I mentioned that the U.S. has been supportive in several ways, and certainly turning this man, Bosco Ntaganda, over to the ICC represents acknowledgement by the United States of the key role that the ICC plays in creating international justice. As well, a very interesting issue came up quite recently. The United Nations General Assembly held its annual meeting, or one of its many meetings, in October here in New York. The headquarters for the United Nations is in New York. Now, the land on which the UN sits is not officially the United States. It's separate. It belongs to the international body of the United Nations. But this man, Omar al-Bashir, had planned to come to the meeting of the UN General Assembly. He's the president of Sudan. He is wanted for the crime of genocide. And there was a great deal of discussion and conversation about whether he should be allowed into the United States. Even though the UN is not on U.S. ground, as I've said, he would have to fly into places in the United States in order to get to the United Nations. And eventually there was so much a public feeling that he should not be allowed to be here, that he did not appear at that meeting. That was really quite remarkable, and in many ways illustrates the shifting norms of international justice, that these people are being excluded from important geopolitical opportunities.
And do you think that makes a mark to a person like him?
I think it does, and I want to show another picture. This man is General Jose Rios Montt. He's from Guatemala. He's not been indicted by the International Criminal Court. He was indicted in his own country of Guatemala for the terrible crimes that he perpetrated on the indigenous Mayan peoples. He was sentenced to 80 years in prison for what he had done, sentenced by a court in his own country. And that, we believe, is very much part of the legacy of the International Criminal Court. That court serves to prosecute crimes in those 4 areas that Sarah mentioned, only when the countries themselves where those crimes occurred are either unable or unwilling to prosecute the criminals themselves. So here, for the first time, the country of Guatemala, that officially perpetrated state-sponsored genocide, killed over 200,000 people, put this man on trial in their own country.
Do you think that would have happened if the ICC did not exist?
Not at all.
It wouldn't have.
No, absolutely not at all. This, I believe, is part of that far-reaching development of that norm of justice.
Okay, good.
And we're seeing it as ultimately the legacy of what brave people like Ben Ferencz did back in 1946.
That is so important, though, because it could be easy enough for just with the political nature of the country to say, we're not going to look at our own.
That's right.
Isn't that typically what has
Yes,
happened? But the
absolutely.
influence of the ICC is what is making the difference.
Okay. That's wonderful.